Mira lived in a quiet town that rested near a wide river and old railway tracks. The town was not famous for anything, but it was a place where people knew each other's names and stories. Children played on the dusty streets, old men sat in tea shops, and farmers drove their carts filled with crops. In the middle of this ordinary place stood Mira's workshop. Her workshop was small, with wooden walls darkened by smoke and a roof patched with metal sheets. Inside, the smell of oil, iron, and burning coal filled the air. Tools hung neatly on the wall, and in the corner stood machines waiting for her hands to repair them. She worked from sunrise to sunset, her clothes always covered with grease, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled down. To the people of the town, Mira was just a mechanic. She fixed broken engines, repaired farming tools, and gave new life to old motorcycles that others thought useless. Men came with their wagons, women brought sewing machines, and children asked her to fix toys. She never refused work, no matter how small. Most believed she was an ordinary woman with ordinary skills. They saw her as quiet and humble. She asked for fair payment and never argued. When customers praised her, she only smiled softly and said it was nothing. Her calm voice and gentle manners made her easy to trust. Some thought she had no dreams beyond her workshop. Others whispered that she had chosen this life because she had no family left. But there was something about Mira that nobody noticed. She always kept her left arm covered. Even on the hottest days when others wiped sweat and rolled their sleeves, Mira's sleeve stayed down. When children asked why, she said the skin on her arm was too weak for the sun. The answer sounded simple, and the children forgot about it. The adults never questioned her, for they believed there was nothing special about a mechanic. Mira liked her routine. She worked during the day and spent her evenings in silence. After locking the workshop, she would sit by a wooden table under a single lamp and mend small gadgets. Radios, watches, pocket knives, anything that needed care ended up in her hands. She enjoyed the ticking of gears, the hum of repaired devices, and the peace that came when a broken thing returned to life. Yet deep inside, Mira often felt something she could not explain. It was as if her heart carried a secret restlessness. Sometimes when she looked at the railway tracks stretching far into the distance, she felt that her life was waiting for something, though she could not tell what. She shook off the thought each time and reminded herself that her work was enough. The town moved on with its usual rhythm until one evening a quarrel broke out in the market square. Two landowners accused each other of stealing water rights. Their shouts grew louder, and soon half the town gathered to listen. The dispute grew serious, and by the next morning the matter was brought to the town court. People said the case would take many days and that the judge would have to decide carefully. Mira listened to these stories while tightening bolts on an old tractor. She had no interest in land disputes. Her life was too simple for such matters. But just as she thought the noise of the quarrel had nothing to do with her, a messenger arrived at her workshop. The man handed her a folded paper sealed with red wax. Mira wiped her hands on a cloth before opening it. The letter was from the court. It summoned her to appear before the judge as a witness in the dispute. She stared at the words, her brows tightening. She could not understand why they wanted her. She was no landowner, no merchant, no farmer with water rights. She was only a mechanic. Yet the court demanded her presence. The townsfolk watched her when she left her workshop that evening with the letter still in her hand. Some whispered in surprise. Others shrugged and said the judge must need someone to confirm a detail. But Mira walked home in silence, wondering why her quiet world was suddenly being pulled into the court of law. Inside her house, she placed the letter on the table and sat staring at it under the dim light. For the first time in many years, the steady rhythm of her life felt shaken. She did not know what the court wanted from her, but in her heart she felt a strange unease, as if the time she had long avoided was finally drawing near. The morning of the court session arrived with heavy clouds in the sky. The town square was crowded. Merchants closed their stalls earlier than usual. Farmers left their fields, and women gathered near the steps of the old courthouse. Everyone wanted to see the case between the two landowners. Such disputes were rare, and the presence of the judge always brought curiosity. Mira prepared slowly that morning. She washed the oil from her hands, tied her hair neatly, and wore her cleanest shirt, though it was still plain compared to the colorful clothes of others. She rolled down her sleeves as always and stepped outside with steady steps. The letter from the court rested in her pocket. As she walked through the streets, she noticed the way people looked at her. Children stopped their play and adults whispered as she passed. Some were surprised that the simple mechanic had been summoned. Others shook their heads, wondering what connection she could have with the quarrel. Mira kept her eyes forward and walked calmly, though inside her heart she felt the weight of uncertainty. The courthouse was a tall building of stone, standing firm at the center of the square. Its wooden doors were wide open and guards stood on both sides. Mira entered quietly and sat on one of the benches reserved for witnesses. The hall was filled with townsfolk waiting for the trial to begin. Their voices blended into a restless murmur. At last, the judge entered. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a stern face. The hall fell silent as he took his seat at the high desk. The two landowners stepped forward, each eager to speak first. One accused the other of stealing water for his fields. The other shouted back, saying the claim was false and that his family had owned the water rights for generations. Their words clashed like steel, but the judge raised his hand, and silence returned. The judge then called the first witnesses, men who worked in the fields and neighbors who had heard parts of the quarrel. Their testimonies were uncertain, filled with half-truths and doubt. Some said they saw water being taken. Others said they saw nothing unusual. The crowd grew restless again, waiting for something clear. Then the judge spoke Mira's name. The hall shifted. People turned their heads. A low murmur ran through the benches. Mira rose and walked toward the front. Her steps were steady, but her hands tightened inside her sleeves. She stopped before the judge and bowed her head respectfully. "You are Mira, the mechanic of the lower street," the judge said. "Yes, Judge," she replied in a calm tone. "You were seen near the river on the day this dispute began. Is that true?" he asked. Mira thought for a moment and nodded. "Yes, Judge, I was repairing a broken cart near the river. The wheel had snapped and the farmer asked for help." The judge leaned forward. "Did you see either of these men take water that did not belong to him?" The hall grew quiet. Mira lifted her eyes slowly. "I saw one of them bring his workers to the river. They dug channels that guided the water to his land. I saw the other arrive later, shouting that the water was his. That is when their quarrel began." The crowd gasped. For the first time, someone had spoken clearly. The judge listened carefully and asked her more questions. Mira answered each one with steady words. She spoke only what she saw, nothing more. Her voice was calm and her manner was firm. When she finished, the judge leaned back in his chair. His sharp eyes studied her as if trying to read more than her words. Something about her presence felt unusual. She stood too calmly, too firmly, as if she carried more weight than a simple mechanic should. The judge dismissed her for the moment, but his gaze followed her as she returned to her bench. Mira sat quietly, lowering her eyes, but inside she could feel that the judge's attention was not ordinary. He had looked at her as if he recognized something hidden. The trial continued with more arguments, but Mira's testimony hung in the air. People whispered that her words might decide the case. Some praised her honesty. Others wondered why the judge stared at her for so long. When the session ended for the day, Mira stepped outside into the cool air. The crowd followed, buzzing with talk of the mechanic who had spoken so clearly. She walked past them without a word and headed toward her workshop. But in her heart she knew something had changed. The judge's eyes had not only seen a witness. They had searched deeper, and she feared the day would come when he would demand more than words. The next morning the town square was alive again. People gathered outside the courthouse as if it were a festival. Merchants left their stalls half empty. Farmers brought their families, and children ran between the steps whispering the latest news. Everyone was talking about the mechanic who had spoken so clearly before the judge. Inside her workshop, Mira tried to keep herself busy. She polished tools, tightened loose screws on an old engine, and even swept the dusty floor. Yet no matter how much she worked, her mind returned to the court. She could still feel the weight of the judge's eyes on her. He had looked at her differently from the others. Not like a witness, not like a simple townsfolk, but as if he knew something more. By midday, another messenger arrived. The court required her presence again. Mira sighed softly and set her tools down. She washed her hands, wore her plain shirt, and rolled her sleeves as always. With calm steps, she left her workshop, though inside her chest her heart was restless. The courthouse was even more crowded than before. As Mira walked through the doors, people moved aside, their eyes following her. Whispers floated through the air. Some said she was brave, others said she must know secrets. Mira kept her head low and walked to the witness bench. When the judge entered, the hall fell silent. He looked over the crowd and then rested his gaze on Mira for a long moment before beginning the session. The two landowners argued once more, each insisting on his rights, each blaming the other. Their words filled the hall like smoke. Finally, the judge called Mira forward again. She stepped into the open space, the crowd leaning closer to listen. The judge's voice was steady as he asked, "Mira, yesterday you spoke of what you saw by the river. Today I ask again, do you stand by your words?" "Yes, Judge," Mira answered. Her voice was calm, though her heart beat hard. "I stand by every word. I saw the water taken and I saw the quarrel begin." The judge nodded slowly. "Then there is no doubt about your truth. But I must ask, how is it that you, a simple mechanic, speak with such steadiness before this court?" The hall grew tense. Mira hesitated. She knew the judge was not only asking about her words, he was asking about her nature, about the strength she carried in her voice. She looked down at her sleeves, then back up at the judge. "I speak as I always do," she said quietly, with honesty. The judge studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. "Raise your left sleeve," he said. The hall gasped. Mira froze where she stood. Her left hand tightened around her sleeve. She had kept it hidden for years, never letting the townsfolk see. The silence in the room pressed against her like heavy stone. Slowly, Mira shook her head. "It is not needed for this case," she replied. The judge's eyes narrowed. "It is needed," he said firmly. "For the truth is not only in words. The truth is also in who speaks them." The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder. Children pulled at their mothers' arms, asking what the judge meant. Men leaned forward, eager to see what was hidden. Mira stood in the center, her heart heavy. She had always known this day might come, though she had hoped it never would. For a long moment she said nothing. The judge did not look away. His stern face showed no anger, only the weight of certainty. At last, Mira raised her hand and pulled back her sleeve. The hall fell into silence so deep that even the wind outside seemed to stop. On her left arm was a tattoo, old yet clear, etched in dark lines. It was not the mark of a common design. It was a symbol of the old order, a sign that once belonged to a circle of protectors who served the land in hidden ways. The judge's stern face softened. He leaned back in his chair, his lips parting slightly but no words coming out. For the first time he was silent. The crowd did not understand. They stared, whispering to one another, asking what the symbol meant. But the judge knew. His eyes were filled with recognition and respect. Mira lowered her sleeve again and stepped back without a word. She returned to her bench, her calm face hiding the storm inside her. She had revealed what she never wanted revealed. The judge had seen her mark, and he had fallen silent because he knew exactly what it meant. The courtroom was filled with whispers that rolled through the hall like waves. People leaned close to each other, pointing at Mira's arm, asking questions, but none had answers. To most of the townsfolk, it was only a strange tattoo. To the judge, it was something far greater. The judge lifted his hand, and the hall grew silent again. His sharp eyes remained fixed on Mira. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if memories from another time had returned to him. His stern face, usually quick to command, now held a rare stillness. The two landowners, confused and impatient, tried to continue their arguments. One shouted about stolen water, the other about family rights, but their voices no longer carried the same strength. The people were not listening to them anymore. Their attention was locked on Mira and the silent reaction of the judge. The judge finally spoke, his tone slower than before. "This case will continue, but first I must ask. Mira, where did you receive that mark on your arm?" Mira lowered her eyes. She had kept the truth hidden for many years, but she knew she could not lie in a court of law. Her voice was steady when she answered. "It was given to me when I was younger. It is the mark of the Circle of Guardians." A hush fell over the room. The crowd did not understand, but the judge did. He leaned back in his chair, his face turning pale with recognition. The Circle of Guardians was a name whispered only in stories. Long ago, they had protected the land from chaos. They were skilled, disciplined, and bound by oath. Few had ever seen them, and fewer still had carried their mark. "You were one of them," the judge said softly, more to himself than to the crowd. Mira did not answer, but her silence was enough. The people in the hall began to murmur again. They had never imagined that the quiet mechanic who fixed their wagons and tools was once part of something legendary. Some doubted the truth, thinking it was only a story. Others looked at her with new respect, their eyes wide with wonder. The judge lifted his hand once more and the whispers faded. "This court will not judge the past," he said firmly. "We are here for the matter of water rights. Yet let it be known that the words of this witness carry more weight than most. She has spoken with honesty, and her mark tells me she has lived by an oath far greater than ordinary men." The landowners shifted uncomfortably. Neither dared to argue now, for the crowd's attention was no longer on them but on the woman they had once overlooked. The session continued with more questions and more arguments, but the case had already begun to bend toward Mira's testimony. Her words stood strong, her memory clear, and no one dared to doubt her anymore. The judge announced that he would give his final judgment after one more day of hearing. The trial was dismissed for the evening. As the people left the courthouse, they surrounded Mira. Some asked questions, others offered praise, and a few simply stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Children pointed and whispered to each other, calling her brave. Mira answered little. She walked calmly through the crowd, her eyes fixed ahead. When she returned to her workshop, the silence felt heavier than usual. She sat at her wooden table, the dim lamp burning softly. Her hands rested on the surface, but she did not reach for her tools. The tattoo on her arm felt like a flame, reminding her of the years she had hidden from the world. She had chosen the life of a mechanic to escape attention, to live in peace. Now that peace was slipping away, she thought of the judge. His silence, his recognition, and the way he looked at her told her that he knew more than the crowd. He must have known the guardians. Perhaps he had seen them in his younger years, or perhaps he had studied their history. His silence was not from confusion but from respect. Mira closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. The town had seen her mark, and whispers would spread faster than fire. The judge had seen her truth, and his eyes had told her that the days of quiet work were ending. That night she did not sleep easily. The past she had buried was rising again, and she knew the trial was only the beginning. The trial was not the only thing people spoke of the next morning. The market was filled with chatter, not about grain or tools, but about Mira. Her name passed from stall to stall, from baker to farmer, from child to elder. Some said she was chosen by fate. Others argued she was dangerous, a woman hiding secrets. A few claimed the tattoo meant nothing more than an old drawing, yet their voices were weak against the tide of excitement. Mira rose early and opened her workshop as usual. She placed her tools neatly, lit the small lamp on the bench, and began working on a broken plow. But her customers arrived with questions instead of machines. One asked about the tattoo. Another asked if she had fought battles long ago. Children gathered at the doorway, staring at her sleeves as if expecting her to reveal the mark again. Mira kept her answers short. "I fix machines," she said calmly. "That is what I do." But the whispers did not stop. By noon, she closed her shop and walked through the town streets, trying to clear her mind. Everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Men nodded respectfully, women whispered among themselves, and children pointed at her from behind corners. The peace she once loved in this town was slipping away like water through fingers. Near the square, she met old Rami, a kind farmer whose cart she had repaired many times. He stopped her and lowered his voice. "Mira, the town is not the same anymore. People will not forget what they saw. You must be careful." The judge's eyes were heavy with meaning yesterday. He knows more than he spoke. Mira gave him a small smile. "I thank you, Rami. I will be careful." The court session that afternoon was crowded once again. The two landowners continued their quarrel, but their words felt smaller now, less important compared to the weight of what had been revealed. When Mira entered, the hall grew quiet for a moment, and all eyes turned toward her. She sat in her place calmly, though she felt the pressure of every gaze. When the judge began, his voice carried authority as always. Yet there was something different in his tone when he spoke. He listened to the landowners, questioned the workers, and weighed the evidence. But each time his eyes returned to Mira, as though reminding himself she was there. At last, one of the landowners grew impatient. He pointed toward Mira and shouted, "Why should her word carry more weight than ours? She is no landowner, no farmer, no merchant. She is a mechanic. Her place is not here." The hall stirred with murmurs. Mira remained silent, her hands folded in her lap. The judge raised his hand for silence, his gaze fixed firmly on the man. Her place is where the truth stands, the judge said, and she has spoken the truth. Do not forget that honesty does not belong only to landowners or merchants. Sometimes it belongs to those who live simply, and that is why it shines brighter. The landowner lowered his eyes, unable to argue further. The crowd whispered again, but this time their voices carried respect. As the session closed for the day, the judge announced that his final judgment would be delivered tomorrow. The people left the hall buzzing with excitement. They knew the case would soon end, but many spoke less of water rights and more of Mira, the mechanic who had stood before the judge with calm strength. Mira returned home quietly, but her mind was not at rest. She sat once again at her wooden table, staring at the tools she normally found comfort in. The tattoo on her arm felt heavier now, as though it carried the eyes of the whole town. She remembered her training from long ago, the voices of her teachers, the oath she had taken, and the moment she chose to leave that life behind. She had wanted nothing more than to live quietly, repairing broken things and avoiding the weight of destiny. But the judge had seen her mark, and the people had seen his silence. There was no way to hide again. That night, as the town settled into sleep, Mira sat awake by her lamp. She wondered if the circle of guardians still existed somewhere beyond the horizon. She wondered if the judge would reveal more tomorrow. And most of all, she wondered if her peaceful life as a mechanic was about to vanish forever. The day of final judgment arrived with a gray sky and cool wind. The courthouse stood firm in the center of the town, its doors wide open as people poured inside. This time the crowd was even larger. Farmers left their fields, shopkeepers closed their doors, and travelers passing through the town stopped to see what the noise was about. Everyone wanted to hear how the judge would decide. Mira walked through the streets slowly. She wore her plain shirt, sleeves rolled down as always, and her steps were steady. Yet her heart carried the weight of the coming day. She knew the trial would end, but she also knew that once again all eyes would fall on her. The whisper of her tattoo had already spread far, and the curiosity of the people burned brighter than before. Inside the hall, the two landowners stood at opposite sides, their faces drawn with tension. Their workers sat behind them, ready to defend their masters with words if called. The crowd filled every bench, their voices buzzing like restless bees until the judge entered. When he appeared, silence fell quickly. His face was stern, but his eyes carried a deep thought that many could not read. He seated himself and looked over the hall before speaking. This case has been long and heavy, he began. Both sides have spoken, and many witnesses have given their words. But only one has given the truth without bending it. Only one has stood calm without fear or favor. That is why today I give my judgment. The hall leaned forward, every ear waiting. The water rights belong to the second landowner, the judge declared. The channels dug were unlawful, and the words spoken in anger cannot change what is clear. The testimony of Mira, the mechanic, has given light where there was shadow. The case is closed. The hall erupted with noise. Some cheered, others argued, but none doubted the decision. The two landowners looked at each other with bitterness, but they knew the judgment was final. The workers shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Amid the noise, Mira stood quietly. She did not smile and she did not frown. She only bowed her head slightly when the judge's eyes met hers. His gaze lingered again, steady and searching, before he finally rose to leave the hall. The crowd followed Mira out into the square. They spoke to her, thanked her, and some even called her brave. Yet their words felt heavy on her shoulders. She had not wanted honor, only peace. Still, she answered politely, never raising her voice, never showing anger. By evening, when she returned to her workshop, she found old Rami waiting at the door. His cart stood nearby, but it was clear he had not come for repair. His eyes were filled with concern. Mira, he said softly, the people will not leave you in peace. They will come with questions, with stories, with hopes. Some may even come with fear. That mark on your arm is no small thing. I remember tales of the circle of guardians from my childhood. If the judge knew its meaning, then others may soon remember as well. Mira nodded. I know, Rami. I kept it hidden for many years. But it could not stay hidden forever. Do you fear what may come? He asked. I do not fear, Mira answered. But I know my life will not be the same. I chose to walk away from the past, but perhaps the past has not walked away from me. That night, Mira sat once again at her table. The lamp glowed faintly, casting long shadows across her tools. She ran her hand across the tattoo on her arm, remembering the day it was given. The oath she had taken echoed in her mind, words she had not spoken in years. She had sworn to protect truth, to guard justice, and to live with honor. She had thought that life was behind her, yet the court had pulled her back toward it. Beyond her window, the town slept, but Mira remained awake. She wondered why the judge had stayed silent after seeing her mark. She wondered if he had once known the guardians or if he feared their return. And deep inside, she wondered if fate was leading her toward something greater than repairing machines. The trial was over, but the real story was only beginning. The morning sun rose over the town, but Mira did not leave her workshop. She sat quietly at her table, the tools neatly arranged around her, the lamp still burning faintly though daylight filled the room. Her mind was restless, moving between the life she had chosen and the one the judge had reminded her of. The town had returned to its daily rhythm. Farmers worked in the fields, merchants arranged their stalls, and children ran through the streets. Yet the whispers about Mira did not fade. People watched her from windows and doorways, curious, admiring, and sometimes fearful. They spoke of her quietly, as if she might overhear. A soft knock on her door broke her thoughts. Mira looked up to see the judge standing there. He was not wearing his formal robes, only a simple coat, but his presence carried the same authority as in the courtroom. "Mira," he said gently, "may I come in?" She nodded, stepping aside. The judge entered and looked around at the workshop. His eyes rested briefly on the tools, the machines, and finally on her. "You did well yesterday," he said. "Your words were honest, your courage calm. Yet I must ask, why have you hidden so long?" Mira took a deep breath. "I wanted a simple life," she said. "I wanted to fix machines, not be part of stories or legends. I left the guardians behind because the world did not need me in it anymore. I only wanted peace." The judge nodded slowly. "Peace is not always what the world allows," he said. "Some truths cannot remain hidden. Some skills cannot remain unused. Your mark is a sign, not only of the past but of responsibility." Mira lowered her eyes. She had feared this day, though she did not know exactly what she feared. "What do you want from me?" she asked softly. "I want nothing that you do not choose," the judge replied. "But the town and its people need honesty, guidance, and protection. There are matters beyond what they know. Matters that require someone who can see clearly, act wisely, and live with courage. You are such a person." Mira remained silent, weighing the words carefully. She had built a quiet life of tools and machines. She had escaped the stories of the guardians and chosen simplicity. Yet the judge's words carried truth she could not ignore. "I cannot leave my life completely behind," she said after a long pause. "I cannot abandon the workshop or the people who trust me to fix their broken things. But I also cannot ignore what I once swore to do." The judge's eyes softened with understanding. "You do not have to abandon one for the other," he said. "You can live with both as long as you are careful and true to yourself. You have always been more than a mechanic. Now others may see it too if you allow it." Mira nodded slowly. A sense of resolve began to fill her. She would continue repairing machines, helping the townspeople, and living her quiet life. But she would also keep her eyes open, her skills ready, and her heart prepared for what might come. She would not run from the past, but she would not let it control her either. The judge stood, offering a small smile. "The town will speak of you now with respect," he said. "Use that respect wisely. And remember, courage is not loud. It is steady, quiet, and true." Mira watched him leave, her thoughts moving like the river beyond the town. She returned to her workbench, her hands steady as she held a wrench and a small gear. She felt the weight of her choices, but she felt ready. Outside, the town moved as usual, unaware of the full story behind their quiet mechanic. Mira worked through the morning, fixing, repairing, and adjusting. But inside her, she knew the world had shifted. She had seen the judge's eyes, the respect in his silence, and the responsibility the mark on her arm carried. For the first time in years, she did not fear what was coming. She only knew she would meet it with honesty, courage, and calm. The workshop, the town, and her oath could exist together. The life of Mira, mechanic and guardian, had begun again. The sun rose higher, casting warm light on the workshop. Mira tightened the last bolt on the old plow, wiped her hands clean, and looked outside. A quiet smile formed on her face. She had chosen her path, and she was ready for whatever might come next. The morning sun shone brightly on the town, casting warm light over the streets and rooftops. Mira stepped outside her workshop, feeling the cool breeze on her face. The world seemed the same as always, yet she knew it had changed. The townspeople no longer saw her as just a mechanic. They saw the strength in her, the honesty, and the quiet courage she carried. As she unlocked the workshop, she noticed people watching her from their windows and doorways. Some whispered words of respect, others offered small smiles. Children ran past, waving and calling her name. Mira nodded in acknowledgement, but she did not stop to answer. She had work to do, and the day would be long. Inside the workshop, tools were neatly arranged, engines waited to be repaired, and machines hummed with potential. Mira began her morning tasks with steady hands. A farmer brought a broken cart. A baker arrived with a failing oven, and even a child carried a small toy that had lost its wheel. Mira greeted each one with the same calm, quiet smile she always wore. She repaired, adjusted, and polished, letting her hands speak where words were unnecessary. Even as she worked, her mind wandered to the past she had left behind. The circle of guardians, the oath she had taken, and the mark on her arm were no longer secrets. The judge had seen it, and the respect in his silence told her that her life as a guardian was remembered and valued. She realized that her path was not just about fixing machines, but also about guiding, protecting, and standing for what was right when the need arose. By noon, a messenger arrived with news. A small dispute had arisen on the far side of the town. Mira listened carefully, nodding as she understood the problem. She could ignore it as she once might have, but now she knew she could not. The town needed her, not only as a mechanic, but as someone who could bring calm, clarity, and fairness to difficult situations. Mira gathered her tools and walked toward the place where the dispute had occurred. People parted respectfully as she approached. Her presence alone brought a sense of order. She listened to both sides carefully, asked questions, and observed silently. Then, with calm words and careful reasoning, she helped them find a solution. The tension eased, smiles returned, and gratitude shone in their eyes. As she walked back to her workshop, Mira felt a quiet strength inside her. She realized that she did not need to abandon her simple life to live with purpose. Her hands could still repair machines, her skills could still bring comfort, and her heart could still honor the oath she had taken. Peace and responsibility could coexist, and she had the courage to balance them. The judge came to visit later that evening. He did not enter with ceremony or warning. He simply stepped inside the workshop, observing the orderly tools, the neat benches, and the quiet atmosphere Mira had created. "You have chosen well," he said softly. "The town will speak of you with respect, but your actions will matter more than their words. Remember that honesty, courage, and calm are stronger than fear or pride." Mira nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had seen the judge's respect, understood its meaning, and accepted her place. She would continue her work, live her simple life, and yet carry the responsibility she had long tried to leave behind. That night, Mira sat by her lamp, the tattoo on her arm faintly visible in the soft light. She thought of the years she had hidden it, of the quiet life she had built, and of the days ahead that would require her skills, her courage, and her wisdom. She smiled gently. The past had found her again, but she was no longer afraid. She had embraced it, and it had strengthened her. The town outside settled into sleep, but Mira remained awake for a moment, looking at the horizon beyond the rooftops. The river glistened in the moonlight. The wind whispered through the trees, and the streets were silent. She knew the future would bring challenges, but she also knew she was ready. Mira rose, carefully arranged her tools, and closed the workshop for the night. She had a life to live, a town to serve, and an oath to honor, and for the first time in many years she felt a deep sense of peace. She was Mira, the mechanic, the quiet guardian, and she had found her path at last. The world outside was waiting, and Mira was ready to meet it with steady hands, clear eyes, and an unwavering heart.